Right. Man, well, I wasn't ready for that. Or maybe I was ready for that. I needed that. Thank you, Mackenzie. Thank you, Ben, for leading us to the cross. We were in the middle of a series. First, I haven't met you. My name is Pete Patterson. I'm the executive pastor here at Renew. That skinny guy that was up here earlier, he's the one that usually does this on Sunday morning. So I get to take his place this morning. He needed a break, and so bear with me. We're going to cover some really great stuff this morning. We're in the middle of a series called the I Am series. We're preparing for Easter as we lead through this Lenten season. As we head to Easter, we're looking at the I Am. There's 7 times in the Gospel of John he says I am. And he quotes Jesus as saying I am. And really it's a reflection back to Exodus when Moses was hearing from God. He said, who shall I tell them that sent me? And he says, tell them I am. And that was the name of God. And so we know that when Jesus spoke to this crowd, the religious leaders immediately knew what Jesus was saying. He immediately knew that he was claiming to be God. And so when we talk about these I am statements, sometimes the word statement may not be enough. It may not have enough weight to it. So as I was thinking about this, maybe a better word might have been the proclamation, that he's making a proclamation of who he is. Or maybe he's announcing. He's making an announcement, a big announcement about who Jesus is. Or maybe it's a declaration that I'm declaring who I am. And so I want you to know this. And so today, the past 2 Sundays, we've talked about I am the light of the world. And then last Sunday was I am the bread of life. And some of you might be wondering, is there something going on between Pete and Wayne? Does Wayne not like Pete anymore? Or what? Why would Wayne give Pete the door? That I am the door. I mean, of all things, why would he do that to me today? So if y'all are thinking that, no, we're fine. Everything's fine. In fact, this is one of those statements that when you look at it, one of the ways I use it when I'm teaching the book of John, I like to pull out my Bible and kind of hold up how the thickness or the thinness, if you will, of the book of John and how thin it is. And I have a Leon Morris commentary that explains this much of text, and the commentary is about that thick, and that's not an exaggeration of explaining what all's in here. So as we look at these different I am statements, every Sunday when we're doing this, they're incomplete. We can't get it all. You won't stay here long enough for us to teach all it is. It'd be a lifetime. And so these statements that John makes are really, I want you to feel the weightiness of those statements. And so they're really profound, they're really depth. And so as we start off this morning, I think if you can't tell by the songs we sing, especially that last song, if you can't tell, I just want to make it real clear. We have people all over the spiritual spectrum, if you will, the spiritual journey of different points in their faith. And so this morning, the first fill in the blank that we have, I want to start off with that. And just make sure we're really clear that Jesus declares himself to be God. Make no mistake about it, that's who he is. I've seen people that say, well, he really didn't know where this was headed, and Jesus was caught off guard. No. Jesus knew exactly what he was saying, and the people who heard him knew exactly what he was claiming to be. And so before we even get started, I want to make sure that is so clear by here. And hopefully you know that. Hopefully if you don't know that, that's what this is about. So this morning we're in John chapter 10. And I think that in order to really understand John chapter 10 well, this aspect of the door, I think it's really helpful to kind of look back to John chapter 9. And we don't have time to read all that, but I'll kind of refresh your memories for those of you. John chapter 9, there's really not a clear break between 9 and 10. I mean, there is a separation, but when you read through, it's really helpful to read the whole thing together. But in John chapter 9, in my NIV, the heading of that says, Jesus heals a man born blind. And so that's the context of what's happened. And if you remember the story, Jesus is there, and he takes some dirt, and he spits in the dirt. Some of you have trouble with that right away. I mean, he makes some spittle in dirt. He creates some mud, and he puts the mud on the blind man's eyes, and he tells the blind man, go to the pool and wash your eyes, and you'll be healed. Imagine the blind guy. I mean, if you're him and all of a sudden you don't know who this guy that's speaking to you, you don't know anything about him, but like, hey, I'm going to give it a try, right? I mean, and a lot of people came by here to try to pray for me and do everything, but I'm going to give this a try. So we find that, and then the guy goes and washes his eyes, and behold, he can see. And so now once he can see, he's walking about, seeing everybody, and his neighbors say, isn't that blind Johnny or blind Billy? Is that him? I mean, what is? And he's like, no, that's not him, because that guy can see. Remember, he can't see. He's like, no. He said, it's me. And the Pharisees began to kind of catch on to what's going on and who healed you, and this is the Sabbath, and he's like, the blind guy's just going, I don't know. I mean, that was this guy I was talking to. He healed me. I don't know who he was. And so, they come to him, and so they're like, well, he doesn't know. Let's go ask his parents. And so he asks the parents, and the parents kind of realize, hey, there's something going on here. These guys they're not all what they're cracked up to be, and so they have ulterior motives, and they just kind of say they don't want to get caught in a trap. So they say, hey, you go ask him. He's of age, and he'll tell you. And so they said, they go back to the previously blind guy, and they start insulting him. And he says, you want to be one of his disciples? Who told you this? And there's no way that guy is from God. And so I'm setting this is all the background to get into this. And this guy looks at him and he says, hey, that's funny that you guys are coming to me saying that that's not of God, but I can see now, and I couldn't see before. And this is something that's new and different. And I don't know. Only God could heal a blind man from birth, eyes. And so this is the testimony of this man. And so he goes on to the Pharisees, and they come to Jesus, and they kind of, they get mad at this blind guy, if you remember, and they kick him out. They kick him out of the synagogue. And so, he goes from all of a sudden he can see to now maybe more destitute because he can't even go into the synagogue anymore. Where a lot of the community happened inside the synagogue for them. So he gets thrown out of the synagogue. He's not going to be allowed to go back in. And Jesus finds him. Jesus looks him up. And can you just picture this? How great it is. He goes talking about him. He just introduces to him and said, hey, I am the Savior. I'm the Messiah. I am it. And so you can imagine the change for this guy. And then in verse 41, the Pharisees come back around, and they come to Jesus. And Jesus has some really strong words for them. And in verse 41 of chapter 9, I'm sorry, I don't have it on the slide behind me, but we'll pick it up in just a second. But he looks at the Pharisees and says that if you were born blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. So basically, he's looking at these religious leaders, the religious police, if you will, and tells them, hey, because you got it all figured out, guys, you understand everything so well, you're not going to catch any of this. If you were blind, if you realized you had a need, you would understand what I have to offer. And so that's the context that he starts to talk to these people. And then, so I'm going to pick it up in chapter 10, verse 1. These should be on the screen behind me. He says, I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will never follow a stranger. In fact, they run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. And then verse 6 is kind of the catcher, isn't it? Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. It goes back to verse 41, right? You don't think you need to do this. You don't understand it. So, I have a little hope today as the one being to teach that, maybe you won't understand me. They didn't understand Jesus either. So I'm not putting myself on the same level, but it gives me a little bit of hope. Hopefully this will be clear. Verse 7, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. So we're going to use gate, we're going to use door, we're going to talk about the two, really the same thing. In a second, we'll see a picture of why that is. I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. So we have this background of this where we find ourselves and this idea that I am the gate. So I was thinking about this idea of doors, and as I left even this morning, I was going out to get in my car to drive here, and I had to unlock the deadbolt, and I had to unlock the door handle. We were locked in for protection for us on the inside, to keep the outside people on. But there's also times when the opposite is true, when we keep and I think about that. I say that because there was a time when what's the most ominous door that I've experienced, and it has to be my first visit to the Travis County Jail. I was coming as a pastor and clergy. It was a clergy visit. That's a different sub-story. They didn't catch me on a lot of the other stuff that I had done, where I probably should have been there, but I was going to visit a church member. And I don't know if you've ever done that. I know a lot of guys in here have been doing prison, and women have done prison ministry. We all know that first feeling when we walk in there, and that door is just this ominous door, and you don't know how ominous it is until you get through that first door and it closes behind you, and you never heard a sound like that ever, the big giant clank, and you can't go anywhere because there's another door that you got to go through. You got to go through that door, and you can't go, if you change your mind, you're not going back to that door unless they decide it's time to let you out. And so you go through the second door to get in there, and I remember thinking, Lord, what happens if something breaks out in here? How do I ever get out? And you're not going to get out unless somebody lets you out. And so that's the mindset I have of that door being the ominous door to walk through. But Jesus has something different here for us to think. It's probably a more common, we're not shepherds. We don't own sheep. We don't know what's this stuff about sheep and pens, and do we really even understand what it's going? So I found this picture that might help us understand a little bit of what Jesus is talking about. And so here's kind of the idea that I kind of picture Jesus is probably looking at one of these, maybe, and he's looking at this pen, that he's got the sheep inside the pen, and you see the artist is rendering this shepherd that sits in the gate, sits in the doorway, and that the shepherd will sit there in order to get some rest. He gets all his sheep in the pen. They can't go anywhere. They're protected from outsiders. They can protect, and so the shepherd will sit in the doorway, and that's how he can get some rest at night. So you can see the translator's issue of doors and gates and what is it, because there's sometimes it'd be in a village where there'd be actually a literal door or gate that would open it, and they would have, in the village, you might have multiple shepherds bringing all their sheep, and they have somebody to tend to the sheep that night while the shepherds go get some rest. But this picture is, you can imagine Jesus looking over, he's talking to these group and says, hey, see that over there? I'm the door. You're not going into that pen until you go through that door. If you try to go over the door, you try to go around the door, that's usually a sign that it's thieves and robbers, because in Jesus' time that he's speaking, these sheep were very valuable. They were good for wool. They were good for meat. They were very, very valuable. So people would steal sheep. People would and so that's kind of the where we find Jesus talking about the sheep. Maybe today I was thinking about what would it be like if Jesus was talking to us modern day? Maybe it'd be a metal detector, that you can't go into this building until you go through that metal detector. I'm the way to get into this building. I'm the one that's going to limit how you where you are. So this artist rendering is a pretty neat picture of what it is, and it may not have been that clean, for these guys. It may have just been shrubbery and brush and rocks and just a mixture. That's a pretty clean and neat picture, but you get the idea of that Jesus is lovingly protecting the sheep. That's one of the functions that shepherd would say. So that's what Jesus is saying. So, just thinking about this, I know anybody's ever heard a sermon on sheep, you always say, man, the sheep are stupid, sheep are dumb, sheep stink, all these things about sheep. And there are some of the stuff I read is, their eyesight's really poor, they really can't see very far, and they will follow a lead sheep. But if the lead sheep goes off a cliff, they're going to go with it off the sheep. So that's kind of gives you. Then other people say, no, sheep are really not that dumb. Sheep are, number one, they're very valuable, but they have real keen sense of hearing. They can recognize and distinguish voices. They can recognize their shepherd that calls out to them. So you got this two different. Maybe we're somewhere in the middle. But anyway, Jesus is somehow referring to us as being sheep, that we need this protection. I'm going to come back to this idea of robbers and thieves. Hopefully we'll have time to do that. But I'm just thinking about different protections. I look back on my history of God protecting me. He's that one in that doorway that's protecting us. That there's been times when I've maybe had a job change that I wasn't expecting. I really wasn't even looking for it, but it's kind of was something that was really clear, and it's anger and bitterness towards that moment that it happened, and then you look back 10 years later, you go, that was the greatest thing ever, not only for me but for my family. And you kind of go, okay, God, I get it. So that's one way that I know in my own life He's protected you. Hopefully, I wish we had time. We could just go, what's some different ways that God's protected you from yourself or from... So one of the things He does is He protects us. And then He goes on to say that He lovingly leads His sheep, that His sheep recognize His voice. And so one of the unique characteristics, especially in a village where you have multiple shepherds and their sheep are all in the pen, they'll basically, one by one, the shepherd would step up and they'd call out to the sheep, and their sheep would recognize their voices, and they would follow that voice, and after all they get the sheep out, then they would lead them on. And Jesus is saying, hey, that's like me. My sheep recognize my voice. And so as we think about, man, how do we recognize God's voice? I know that's a big question I get a lot of times, and I'm far from being an expert on it, but I just thought there's some real clear ways that God, some real fundamentals, if you will, of if you want to hear God's voice, is where do you start? And one is through His Word. We start right here. That there's a lot of things that we don't know about God, but let's start with the things we can learn and discover and discern, where He's revealed Himself to us, that would be His voice. And so we start here, reading. Hopefully you're on a reading plan, that you're reading daily His Word. And so that's one. Another is just prayer, of being prayerful of, God, here's the situation I'm in. Here's where I find myself. And sometimes God will speak to us or He'll give us a scripture in the middle of that prayer, reminding, hey, remember, don't worry. Don't be anxious for anything because of who I am. And then, and maybe it's just it's spiritual community as well, that I don't necessarily know where God's leading. I don't hear His voice, but I'm with a group of other believers who are also trying to follow His voice, that love Him, that want the best for His world and for me, and they will open up and discern what it is that I'm doing. So He speaks through His Word, through prayer, through spiritual community, of people centered on Him. And then sometimes there's just that prompting of the Holy Spirit. I mean, that idea that all of a sudden it comes out of nowhere, that, man, I don't know where, I never have thought like that ever in my life. And all of a sudden something clicks, that maybe that's how the Holy Spirit, that thought you had never heard. But He also goes on to say He knows our name. He knows every single one of our names. And, I think sometimes we say that flippantly here at church. I mean, I don't know about you, but yeah, He knows my name, whatever. But the intimacy that this shepherd would know, Jesus is the one saying, hey, just like that shepherd's calling out to, he's calling his sheep, hey, Snowballs, come here, hey, Blackie, over here, hey, Two-Tone, come here, He's got these nicknames for the sheep, and I think, He has nicknames for us, that He knows us with that intimacy of His. And so we don't necessarily look at that and recognize that He knows every single one of our names, and that the intimacy that He has. And then he leads them out. Now, I was thinking about that in the context of the pen. What is that pen? And who are the thieves and robbers? I think, so why would He talk about the thieves and robbers going over the wall? And I think it's because there's a lot of things that people don't want to go through the door, right? They don't want to go through the door of Jesus. And let me just, the second bullet point that we have there, that fill in the blank, is Jesus declares Himself to be the single access to God. There's people that want to go over that, get around Jesus. This church sings way too much about Jesus and all that. This is the one thing that we have. This is why we do what we do on Sunday. This is why we're going to celebrate Easter in a few weeks, because our human hearts don't naturally want to believe this exclusive claim of Jesus Christ. But I'll just use a little bit of logic here. In a few weeks, it's going to be Good Friday, and we think back on that time when he's in that garden and he's praying out to God. He's sweating blood out of his. Is there another way, God? Is there another way that I can go where I don't have to go to the cross? I don't have to be my flesh torn. I don't have to be crucified. I don't get spit on. I don't get cursed. Is there another way I can go? And we ultimately know that he goes that way, and there's an empty tomb and a resurrected Lord that we see. 5,000 people see him at one time. This is this great picture of the resurrection. And so why would Jesus go through all that if there was another way? I mean, that's why he's saying, hey guys, it is me. I am the door, and this is the only way through. So I want to present to you that I think it might be the thieves and robbers, might be anybody that wants to teach something different that he's talking about. Those are tough words that he's using for them. But anybody that wants to tell you something different is stealing a joy and a privilege they have. And this fact that he knows our name, and Wayne mentioned it earlier. I read an article this week that there may be 5,000 worlds out there. NASA's got a new telescope that they've seen. They're looking out this one direction of the telescope, and they're doing the math to go, if we go all the way around, there may be as many as 5,000 worlds that we didn't know about out there. And there may be 100 to 200 billion planets that are out there. And the God who created all of that, knows you by name. Just this intimacy. He protects you. He leads you. And then he offers you real and meaningful life. One of the clear things is, he says the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And hopefully you've memorized that verse. You know that by heart. So there's one door. There's one abundant life. And it's found when you give your life away. Now, I was thinking about this as I was preparing. I could have highlighted a whole bunch of people inside of Renew, and it was so tempting to do that, but I knew that would get me nowhere. So I thought of two people that are polar opposite extremes that I know. And one is, if you had the picture from Moldova, this is my recent trip to Moldova that was there at Christmas over New Year's. This is us. If you go back to that first slide, it's kind of a funny. This is a group of us leading children's and some Christmas songs and all. And I think this slide is really kind of humorous because Stan and Monique are the two holding the sign. And if you can tell, you may not be able to tell there, but it's Russian and Romanian and Ukrainian languages that they're leading the kids in. And Stan and Monique are from Houston. They don't know anything about it. So they don't know when to switch. Those are the very first time. I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. Next village we go to, let's one of the Moldovans switch the signs around. So Daniel's the one in the far right. He's one of the kids, teenagers. He's in the transitional living housing that we're working with through Justice and Mercy International. And just a tremendous young man that I got to know in my time over there. And Daniel... I think by everybody's standard in this room, I think it's safe to say Daniel is poor. He grew up in a village where 80% of the people are gypsies, but this ministry we're working with had found him as a little boy and had worked with them, and now he's part of their transitional team. And all he really owns are the clothes on his back, and I'll give him some feedback. I don't know if y'all are too, but we're getting. So he's got the clothes on his back and that guitar. And so we're riding on the bus together, and we have, it ended up being hours and hours of bus riding between the different villages we were going to. But he's speaking. He's got broken English. His English is a whole lot better than my Romanian. So we're trying to carry on the conversation, and he says, and through Google Translator, he says, "I want to lead people to Jesus with my guitar." And I remember thinking, man. This is a beautiful kid that this is what he wants his life to be about, is leading people in worship. And he had tons of worship music on his phone, and he would play, hey, you know this song, you know this song. And so we just had this great time. And so he was the one that was leading these kids to worship. And then the polar opposite I was thinking about as I was preparing was my friend, I'm going to call him Bill, because he's got some family here in town, so I'm going to call him Bill. I don't think he would mind me saying, but Bill's the total opposite. I think by everybody's standard in this room, he's wealthy and has a lot of he has a lot of assets. But he tells the story about himself is that he's a doctor, made a lot of money. He had one goal in his life, and that was to retire by the time he was 40 years old. And he was doing everything he could do to retire by 40. And he would tell you, I was angry, I was ticked off all the time. He said, and he was a control freak. He controlled everything around him. his kids, his wife, his business, and everything was under his control. And then one day, through a diagnosis of a nephew that he loved, a leukemia diagnosis, and he realizes he can't help his nephew that he loves. And he said, this is him telling the story, that he said, I was taking a shower and I just realized I can't control this. And he fell to his knees and just said, God, I've been to church my whole life. I've done all these things. I thought I was following you. I'm realizing that I'm carrying all this other stuff with me that's not something you have. And so I surrender that to you. So from that time, Bill made his I'm changing his name every service. So he makes this decision to follow more intently. It's being a Type A person. He could do that with better than most of us. And so he changes his life. He begins praying with his patients, and he begins to see a countenance of them that they're coming in nervous. They've got the surgery, and now he began to love his job. And by the time I meet him, he'd been worked way past retirement age, and he was loving everything he did about his job and his patients and his work. And so he had this 180. And I was just thinking about that. Jesus offers this abundant life, this full, meaningful life. And look at us, and we're a culture that's probably the wealthiest culture to ever be, to ever exist. And yet by all the studies, we're one of the unhappiest we've ever been. We have the band wants to come back up. We have they're the unhappiest we've ever been. We've had a suicide rate that is off the charts, and yet we're probably the most self-centered people that have ever existed as well. So as we think about that, think about who he is, that he has. This last little bullet that I have for you, the third one was that Jesus offers a really meaningful life. And then the fourth one there, the last one is, Jesus' sheep follow Jesus. And that's one of the things I want us to leave us with this thought this morning is Jesus' sheep. If you consider yourself one of Jesus' sheep, he asks you to follow him in this. And so for some of us today, I can't help but think that maybe today's the day. Today's the day you make that first-time decision that's like, I'm going through the door. I'm going through the door of Jesus. And for some of us, maybe we're like my friend Bill that just says, I've gone through the door. I thought I went through the door, but I brought all this other baggage with me. And he's saying, I'm going to empty the door. And maybe for some of us, and maybe for all of us today, that my prayer is that God would restore to us, as David prayed in the 51st Psalm, that David would pray that he would restore the joy of our salvation. And so my prayer for our church today is that God would make that fresh, he would make that new, that the things he'd done for us, that he would lead it. And so I'm going to pray for us, and we'll go back into worship. And as we sing to the God that loves us, the God that created this world that we don't even know how big it is. We can't even comprehend it. And he offers a direct relationship with each and every one of us in this room. Holy God, we have no idea. We have no idea what you meant when you said that you're the door. We just get this glimpse, and it's so beautiful. Just a little bit that we understand, God, that we would freshly look at who you are and the fact that you love us and you care for us, and you lead us, you offer these things to us, you offer this life that we can experience not just in heaven, but this side of heaven, God. And so I pray for every one of us in this room, God, that you'd make that fresh, you'd make that new, that as we prepare just for that great morning on Easter, that you are resurrected. The tomb is empty, God, and we have 2,000 years of church history to be excited about who you are, that our lives will be different because we know you and we walk with you. Lord, thank you for meeting us here this morning. We ask all these things in your Son's name. Amen.